Good morning. Welcome to Recovering Addict. I'm LT. I'm an alcoholic addict. Well, at least I used to be anyway. And 2 times in my life I've hit rock bottom in the early 2000s with meth. Got a burglary, felony, went to jail, almost went to prison for 15 years. Luckily, after I relapsed and broke my probation, violated probation with a dirty drug test and getting caught with meth, they gave me another chance, right? I went to a halfway house. I got out. I got on probation. I was on probation for about 3 years. I got off a little early because I was doing so well. And guess what? The day I got off probation, I started smoking weed. Yep, I'm a drug addict. I didn't realize what it being a drug addict meant. You know, I almost went to prison for 15 years. You think I would have known. I get to my mid-30s because I'm scared straight. I get a job that requires me to do drug tests, so that's why I quit smoking weed in the first place. You're welcome. Thank you for being here. Journey in Recovery Through Writings. Jen Ray. Love it. I get scared straight after probation, right? So I stopped doing the hard drugs, but I smoke weed, and then I quit smoking weed to get a job because of drug tests. And then I'm good and clean from like 2010, 2009 till 2014. I'm on a health journey. I'm clean. I'm sober. I'm not smoking cigarettes. I'm not vaping. I'm not nothing. I'm eating clean. I'm working out twice a day. Probably the best shape I've ever been in my life. And then not realizing, what addiction really does to people like me is it takes you down, right? And so I started drinking. For some reason, it got in my mind. I was proud. I got arrogant with my position at work, the money we were making, and decided to start drinking. And that slowly turned into, over a couple of year period, into where it was a habit. Like every single night I was drinking, and every weekend I was trying to party blackout drunk. Son was in an accident in 2017. And then for the next 2 years after that, I was a belligerent blackout, ruin lives, alcoholic, ruining my reputation at work, destroying our marriage, scaring our children. And my health was, doctor told me, if you want to see your children grow up, you want to live for another 10 years, you need to quit drinking. So I checked myself into a rehab, which brings me to the topic of today. When I got to rehab, I was sober, right? You get that first week or so under your belt, and then you start looking around at the people in their program, and you're like, there's like two thoughts that usually go through people's heads. My problems aren't this bad. I don't need to be here. I'm not like these people. They need to be here, not me. I'm good. I'm leaving. And a lot of people will leave rehab because of that. Or there's the other thought process. They don't know me. They haven't been through what I've been through. This place isn't right for me. I'm leaving. We either think we're better than them or we think we're worse than them. In either case, we think we're unique when it comes to like getting help with drug addiction. And so when you enter into a program, in a rehab, in an outpatient or inpatient program, you need to stick it out regardless of the temptations that are in your mind to leave because it's not what you expected, or it's a great excuse to have this not meet up to your expectations. So we're going through the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. This was written in 1943, 1942, something like that, and it's a demon writing to a younger demon on how to tempt people. This letter number 2 in particular is talking about his patient. Okay, so let me really lay it out so it's clear for you. The first demon, his name is Screwtape. The second demon, the younger one that's being mentored, is Wormwood. Wormwood is working with a guy who they call the patient, a person like me. So this demon is tempting a human, and they refer to the humans as patients. And so when we're going through this, you'll hear Screwtape write in these letters to Wormwood about their father. And when he says their father, he's talking about the devil. And when he says their enemy, he's talking about God. And when he says patience, he's talking about people like you and me. So in this particular letter, he's writing to Wormwood that his patient is becoming a Christian. And he's talking about, don't worry about it, we'll still employ these tactics because he's going to go to church and we're going to make him feel arrogant and look at the people sitting in the church with him and give him the two trains of thought. Now, this is not a divine written script, right? This is written in satire. It is fictitious, okay? This is sci-fi kind of stuff. But the Bible confirms, and we went over this last week, through 1 Peter 5:8, John 13:2, Luke 22:3, Acts 5:3, 1 Corinthians 21:1, Matthew 6:23, and Matthew 13:19, that there is evil forces out there, that the devil walks around like a roaring lion to seek those who he can devour, and there is a third of the heavenly host that has been sent to earth to reign here and to sway people to their side, to hell, right? You got heaven and hell. That's what the Bible describes. So even though it is written in satire and it's written so beautifully, and the daily distractions of what we go through, that it is so relatable and hard to not read as like, this is fact for me. Okay, because my belief, my higher power, you choose your higher power. Let me tell you about mine. He created and sustains this whole world. So devils are not, my God is in control. The devil is nothing but a micro grain of sand compared to God. I shall not fear any of that, right? But I am a human with a sinful heart. Thank God that Jesus came and died. That's what the whole thing's all about. And we are separated from God from birth, that we have a sin nature, and that God came and sacrificed himself to make us right with him and conquered death by raising from the dead and goes back up to heaven. And we put our hope in that. That's what I believe. And that is where my foundation lies. And that is what's keeping me on a path of high morality, on no relapsing. That's what it's all about when you join AA or NA, right? You're supposed to go on the spiritual journey so that you can connect with things that are going to keep you from becoming or going back to the person you were in addiction. Think about the person you were. We talk about writing your eulogy. If you were in the middle of your addiction or right there towards the end of you quitting and you wrote your eulogy, would people have to get up and lie about who you are? And so I want to rewrite this last half of my life of my eulogy. So when I do die, Lord willing, many years from now, that my children could get up and read my eulogy and it's not a lie. He helped. He was a good Christian guy. He had a strong conviction in his higher power, And these letters I'm going to read to you now is from Screwtape to Wormwood. His patient is becoming a Christian. Now his Christian guy is going to go into a church. He says, I am not all pleased that your patient has been churning Christian. Don't think for a second that there won't be consequences for this oversight. And the crazy thing is I've read these letters now a bunch of times, and he always ends his letter to Wormwood like your affectionate uncle, your devoted uncle. Like he loves his, and he considers this younger demon a nephew. And it's almost like he tells him he loves him, but at the same time, you can see there's hate and evil even between these two as these letters are going back and forth. So there's consequences because he screwed up and he let this patient become a Christian. He says, however, given the circumstances, we can still salvage the situation. Remember, plenty of adults have briefly explored Christianity only to return to our side. This guy's habits, his mentality, his physically still lean in our favor. Think about that. So you enter into addiction. What has to change? Your habits, your mentality, and your physical abilities, right? And physically. He says this dude just turned Christianity. He's going to church. Big deal, because guess what? His habits, mentally and physically, so his habits mentally and physically still lean in our favor. When you go to rehab, you're in your groups, right? Your habits, mentally and physically, still lean in the favor of your addict. So that has to change. Think about that for a minute. He says, right now, one of our greatest allies is the church. And I don't mean the grand, eternal idea of the church that even makes our most daring feel uneasy. What your patient sees is the modern building in the latest suburb. When he steps inside, he spots the familiar faces of the local store owner handing out new glossy paper books with confusing papers and an old worn-out hymnal filled with outdated religious songs. Looking around, he'll recognize those very neighbors he typically avoids. So he's hopeful that when he walks into this church, he's already going to be annoyed this patient that's becoming a Christian. We're like, don't worry about it. His habits, mentally and physically, are still leaning towards us. He's going to walk into this church. He's going to see some people he knows from around town and be like, I avoid these people. I avoid them. What am I doing here with them now? What did he hand me, all this confusing paper? I don't even understand what it says. And what are we singing? What are these words? This is old and outdated, boring. Why am I here? He's hoping for that, right? He says, emphasize those neighbors. Shift his thoughts between the holy idea of the body of Christ and the actual faces he sees. The real attributes of those people aren't that important. It is easy for him to conclude that if they seem odd or out of place, their beliefs must be too. He's hoping that he looks around and sees these people and like, man, these guys are odd. They're out of place. So all this stuff we're believing, it will be too. And he's hoping to distract him out of the church. And think about that. When I said when you go to your recovery program, right, when you first enter into rehab and you're looking around at all these people, you're either thinking, I'm better than them. My problems ain't that big. I got to go. Or they don't understand me. They haven't been through what I've been through. None of them understand the depths and darkness of my addiction. We think we're unique, right? That distraction to get us out of anything that's going to positively promote and push us into a moral high standard. In this particular letter, we're talking about a man going to church. But you could relate it to you coming out of addiction and going to a group of people who are going to help your soul get onto a higher moral road that will eventually lead to the enemy, according to him, which would be God. Stick it out. Watch for these little deceptive traps throughout your day. I was taken in by him yesterday. Tuesdays and Thursdays are the days that I'm supposed to read and prepare for this, and also gather as a family and read and study through some biblical texts, right? And we're going to go through right now Colossians and Philemon. And guess what? I was distracted, and I didn't even realize it until I was in bed at 10-something at night, and it hit me. You didn't do this. And I was like, what? How was I so distracted all day that it never once entered my mind? And I think about these letters, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So I'm thinking, how can I write stuff down on walls right in front of me so I have to bump into the things I want to accomplish throughout the day so I do not get distracted from them? So he says the real attributes of those people aren't that important. It is easy for him to conclude that if they seem odd or out of place, that their beliefs must be too. At this point, his idea of Christians is heavily influenced by historical or traditional imagery. And the modern attire of the church appears subtly unsettling. Keep that realization under wraps. Maintain the vagueness, and you'll have an eternity to twist his understanding. Keep him distracted. Keep him worrying about the stupid crap about what he sees and the minute stuff of what the church he thinks should look like, whether it be the building, the music that's playing on the stage, some of the stuff that's not important at all, and what people look like, how they dress. He says, preparing for the inevitable disappointment he will feel as he adjusts to church life. This happens to everyone when they transition from aspiration to reality. God lets this happen because he has this idea of turning humans into his willing followers. So the devil is talking about here right into Wormwood. We want him to come and become slaves and cattle we can corral and make misery. But God's going to woo him in, and he's going to let him have free will because God wants willing followers. He says he wants them to achieve the spiritual goals without his direct intervention. This is both an opportunity and a challenge for us. If they get past this initial hurdle, they become less reliant on emotional highs, making our job of temptation tougher. Ooh, think about that for a second. You're in a program. You're still rocking your emotional highs, and those emotional highs are knocking you around the room and getting you to make bad decisions because your emotions are out of control. Same things when you enter into a church. You don't know. You're just looking around. You're brand new. You're like, oh, my God, these people are stupid. These songs suck. What am I doing? You're on emotional, and you bail, right? They're depending on you to stay immature and unable to handle your emotions. And this goes for recovery. This is written in satire. This is a fictional book, but it relates to just plug it in where you think you need to be. He says, this is an opportunity and a challenge for us because if they get past this initial hurdle, what initial hurdle? emotional highs, right? Because if you can get past the initial hurdle of emotional highs, it makes the the spirit, the bad energy job of temptation tougher. That's crazy. Assuming the people nearby are relatively ordinary, our job can be straightforward. But if he knows about their flaws, like if the lady with the weird hat is obsessed with card games, or if the guy with the noisy shoes is greedy, that's even better for us. So when you walk into these programs and you see people who struggle, you see people who have flaws, you know their annoying idiosyncrasies that can drive you mad if you think about them, or at least distance you from them and get you to isolate and go away on your own, right? Because these devils don't want us connecting as Christians in a community, in a group, though we have a promise that the gates of hell will not prevail, right, in Matthew. We have nothing to worry about, but they don't want that. They're going to do what they can to distract you from being a part of this body, the bride of Christ. He says if we can keep them obsessed with what the people around them do that's weird or annoying, that's better for us, because they don't want us to think on the things that are good and keep us stoic and moral and in communion with God, especially as a community. It says keep him from questioning why their flaws don't discredit their beliefs, while his own flaws don't seem to challenge his. It's okay. It's not okay for them, but it's okay for me. Don't let him think about why God's loving and is okay with these flaws, but able to look over it. Keep him confused. It says, even though it seems like an obvious thought, with the right influence, he won't think of it. He hasn't been with the enemy long enough to really understand humility. Even though it seems like an obvious thought, with the right influence, he won't even think of it. So make sure he doesn't, right? Give him the right influence so he doesn't think about it. Because why? He's new. He hasn't been with the enemy, and he's talking about God when he says enemy, long enough to really understand humility. Are you in your recovery program long enough to understand humility and what it means to love the people in your group next to you and to understand what they're going through? That it can't be like, oh man, how come they're accepted into this and it's okay? And why how come the church, which is a forgiveness thing, right? How can they overlook this person and that person be forgiven? You have to receive a certain amount of humility to actually love people, regardless of what their past says. I had a guy on my show the other day. He wrote a book called All My Friends Are Felons. He went to the prison, kind of reformed the education process and system inside there. And he was encouraged to not look at these guys as rap sheets. Just get to know them. Because he had a total paradigm shift as soon as he walked into these prison cells, because on his initial presupposition, he thought, these are sinners, these are wretched people, they have no business. As soon as they cross that and they're in prison, they are the worst of worst, and they deserve to be where they are. They're not human. I have no regard. I don't care what happens to them. But he got forced into a situation where he had to confront these people as an educator and realized, that guy's cool. I'd open a business with that guy. His paradigm shifted. And so he was encouraged to not look at their rap sheets, because he didn't want to sway his view of these people before he got to know them. He wanted to get to know them post-addiction, post-drugs. You know, when we're on drugs, we're insane. You know, when we're on drugs, we make the most stupidest choices you can imagine. And so we get clean and sober and I get our mind about us and we're working on good things, even in a prison cell. He got to know some of these people. And that was humility. He had to humble himself to realize this, right? He might think that he's earned brownie points just by converting, and he feels like he's doing a favor by attending church with these smug, regular folks. Let's keep him thinking that way for as long as possible. So Screwtape is writing to him. We're going through the Screwtape Letters. We're on letter 2. His patient, a human that Wormwood is tempting to be anything but a Christian, has now become a Christian or is going to a church. And he says, all right, don't worry about it. It sucks, and you're going to be in trouble for it, for letting him become a Christian. There, Wormwood. We'll deal with that later. But look, this is how I want you to employ the efforts to tempt him out of this church. Get him to think about the people around him in a negative way. Do not let him become humble to where he understands what true forgiveness and acceptance is. Keep him thinking about their flaws, how he's better than them. And then keep him thinking that he is better than them by thinking that he has earned some type of brownie points by becoming a Christian, and feels like he's doing people a favor by attending church with these smug. You guys are lucky I'm here at church. Let's keep him in that thought process as long as possible. And he says, your devoted uncle, Screwtape. Crazy. Letter 3, we will talk about Monday. We're going through the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. We're looking at how demons and devils, from the viewpoint of C.S. Lewis's in-depth, ingenious writing, talks about how they tempt us away from God, tempt us into horrible decisions, ruined marriages, drug addiction. There's 32 of these letters, I think. I think it's 32. Somewhere up in the 30s, maybe more, I can't remember. But we're going to go through every one of them over the next Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So Monday, we're going to go through letter 3. We're going to get into that. So, get on your knees tonight. Say a little prayer. I don't know who your higher power is, but I suggest you do you. I suggest you cry out to God, the one who wrote this Bible. Say, show me. I'll tell you right now, we don't realize it. I didn't realize it. But we are in a spiritual warfare. We are not. Our battle is not against flesh and blood. Our battle is against spiritual powers and principalities. So keep your hearts guarded. What you put in your ears and your eyes is what feeds your heart and soul. Tonight when you binge Netflix, or today when you flip open your phone and you scroll through TikTok and Facebook, guard your heart. All right, y'all? God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Till next time, do not put yourself in a high-risk situation. Stay strong, work your programs, and remember, we recover better